Hey scholars, today we're talking about immunity, and I'm pretty excited about this video. We're going to be talking about the cell-mediated response and humoral response, which is really sort of like cell warfare. This is how the cells in our body, they're going to detect pathogens, which are just bad invading bacteria. They're going to detect them. They're going to bind with them. They're going to create other cells, some of which are going to create antibodies, which are going to swarm in and try to kill this and kill the cell. Some are going to create other cells which will come in and attack, basically creating these armies to fight off the invading pathogens, which I think is pretty cool. So let's get started. This is first lecture of the immune system, and we'll be talking about specific immune responses today in lecture 32. And there are two types of specific immune response. And if there's specific immune response, there's also general immune response. Now those aren't the two types we're talking about today. Today we're just talking about specific. And what that means is that the body's fighting off a specific pathogen. So this isn't just, any bacteria. This is when there's a specific bacteria that's invaded the body, and our body's going to fight off that specific one. So we're not talking about things that the body does for any bacteria, such as inflammation, that sort of thing. There's a particular one. How's it going to fight off this one bacteria? An example is strep. Streptococcus aureus is one of the strains of bacteria that causes strep. So that's an example of something that this is what the body would do to help fight that off. And again, if I ever go too fast and you need more time to write, feel free. The video can be paused while you guys write. Two types. This first type is going to be the humoral response. And we're going to start off with our pathogen. Alright, there's our pathogen. It's just all that we have to draw on it is the circle for the cell, label it a pathogen, and then draw an antigen on it. And antigens are, we've talked about these before with blood types. This is a protein projection with a specific shape, and so the antigen, which is right there, has a specific shape, and only certain things can bind to it if the receptor has the correct shape. And we talked about antibodies and how antibodies would bind with antigens, but other cells can also bind with the antigen too. And this pathogen, it can occur naturally, or it can be given as a vaccine. So if you receive a vaccine for something, which we all have, before going to college, you have to go get a meningitis vaccine. And what they'll do is they'll inject dead pathogens into the bloodstream. So the dead pathogens, they can't actually cause the infection because they're dead or inactive for whatever reason. But then they will produce the body, because of this humoral response and then the cell-mediated response, which we'll see after this, the body will produce the correct antibodies and other memory cells that will be able to fight that off if the real pathogen invades the body later on. So this is also happens with vaccines. Alright. You have a certain type of cell called a beta cell. Not a beta cell, sorry, a B cell. The B cell will attach to the pathogen. And you have about 10 million different types of B cells in the body. And they have various antigens. Right? Only a few with that will have any one particular antigen. So you have 10 million B cells, but they don't all have that antigen right there that's going to bind to this antigen. Some will have other shaped antigens that will bind with other pathogens or other cells that the body shouldn't have in it. So you don't have 10 million of these B cells. You have 10 million B cells in general. You only have a handful of these for any one particular pathogen. I'll go back so you can see this is next we're just going to draw, and you can continue this on your same sheet of paper. Just a quick picture of after the B cells attach to the pathogen. So if you're still writing, go ahead and pause it. I'm going to move on. So there's our pathogen and our B cell, which is attached, and you can see on there we have the antigen that the pathogen has, and then around it we have the B cell's antigen where it's attached. After attaching, the B cell will divide to make two other types of B cells. So it's attached to the pathogen. It knows the pathogen's there. It says, all right, this is time. We got to start dividing. We got to start making some new B cells. We have to get ready to fight this thing off. This isn't supposed to be here. So it makes plasma B cells and memory B cells. Plasma B cells will be for the primary response. These are going to fight it off initially. Memory B cells will remember this pathogen and be ready to go later on if additional pathogens attack in the future, which is the secondary response. So, the plasma B cells, what they will do is they're going to make enormous amounts of antibodies which will attach to and kill the pathogens. So here they're going to make an army of these antibodies, which aren't cells, they're just molecules that they're going to kill off the pathogen, resulting in the death of that pathogen. And this will be called, like I said, the primary response, primary immune response. All right. So those, like I said, the B cells release those, created those antibodies, those form and attack the pathogens. The memory B cells, these are going to just stay in the body. They're just going to kind of wait around. They're not going to do anything. They'll be in the body for a long time. And if the pathogen comes back in the future, these are there ready to repeat this response and basically perform the same action that the original B cell did. So, and like we said, the body only had a few of these originally, and now after that pathogen attacks and there's all these memory cells waiting around, now there's a much higher quantity. So if this pathogen comes back in the future, it'll be a quicker response to it because now we have all these memory B cells waiting around to repeat the process and fight off these pathogens again. This is called the second immune response, is the creation of these memory B cells, because they are the ones that fought this off first, or primarily. These are the ones that are going to stay around and fight this off if a second set of pathogens comes in. So that was the humoral response. Let's go and do a quick recap of that. In the humoral response, the pathogen comes in, when that could be from a vaccine or just the real thing. It's going to attach to the B cell, and there's about 10 million B cells in the body, but only a handful of the ones that for this particular pathogen. So the B cells will attach to the pathogen. You can see there it's not attached, and then bam, it's going to attach. After attaching, the B cell will divide to make plasma B cells. The plasma B cells, those are going to start making antibodies. And there's our army of antibodies. More than 6, they're going to create thousands of these. And then we have memory B cells, which will wait around in case the pathogen comes back. Next, we have this one, which I think is cooler, the cell-mediated response. So we'll draw our pathogen there with its antigen. Alright, so the pathogen comes in, and this time it gets eaten. And it gets eaten by a macrophage, and a process called phagocytosis. And there's a macrophage. So, it's already starting off cooler. There's a cell, a monster cell, a macrophage is going to come in and eat the pathogen. And there's our poor little pathogen inside the big old macrophage that phagocytosized it. And all cells have antigens of some sort on them. This macrophage is going to have an antigen that something called a helper T cell will get. And helper T cell is kind of a lame name for this cell. It should have a cooler name. The video yesterday that you guys watched at the end of class, the guy talked about how helper T cells kind of got the shaft when it comes to naming, and if those people that named the killer T cells, they should have named it something better. But that's right, the helper T cell. So the T cell will bind to the macrophage and get information about the pathogen. Helper T cell binds to the macrophage. Macrophage says, alright, we have this pathogen. It's got this certain antigen. The helper T cell is going to reproduce and create more helper T cells to mediate or sort of coordinate this response. This whole response is called the cell-mediated response. We have the macrophage, which is kind of a mediator. It's going to eat the cell and then tell the helper T cell about it. And then the helper T cell is going to coordinate the response. They're sort of if they're going to create an immune response army, they're the generals. They're the ones in charge. They're going to call up the troops. They're going to tell the troops what to do and just coordinate everything. So these are kind of like the general of the army, and create these helper T cells. Now, I wrote TH for helper T. I don't want to write helper T cell out each time, so T sub H is the helper T. I do 3 of them. They're going to create a lot of them, but there's also 3 kind of things that they'll do, 3 main things, so that's why I drew 3. First, they're going to stimulate the creation of killer T cells. And these killer T cells will start as just stem cells that can be created into different things. So they'll differentiate into killer T cells once the helper T cells secrete a chemical that will cause the production of these guys. And they will have an antigen which will be shaped in such a way that it can bind to the antigen of the pathogen. So this it looks like a sort of a trident thing that's going to stab the cell. That's not what's happening. This is it's going to bind to the antigen from the pathogen. All right. So the helper T cells stimulate the creation of these killer T cells, and the killer T's are going to go in and bind and then kill the pathogens. And there's different ways that they'll do that. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll just, when they bind to it, they will cause and enough of them bind to it, they're actually going to cause the cell membrane to dissolve, which basically, you can think about it, it's basically like causing the skin of the cell to just, deteriorate. And then all the stuff inside is just going to leak out and the cell's dead, which is pretty cool. Next, another thing it's going to do, it's going to get we got these killer T cells involved. It's going to also recruit some B cells to come in. And B cells, if you remember back to the humoral response, our B cells were in charge of creating those antibodies. So remember, B cells create the antibodies. Killer T cells are actually going to come in and attack. Alright, the B cells are going to start making antibodies. They're going to tell them to make those antibodies. So now we got antibodies involved. We have an army full of the killer T cells. We have B cells making antibodies. These are like the spearmen that are coming in to attack. These are more like B cells are more like the archers. They're sending in the arrows or the antibodies. And some of the THs will stick around as memory T cells for that secondary response. So those are sort of the reserve backup in case this pathogen decides to attack again in the future. Alright, so a quick recap of the cell-mediated response. Cell-mediated response, a pathogen comes in with a particular antigen, it gets eaten, phagocytosized by our macrophage here. The macrophage is going to give information off to our helper T cell. The helper T cell is going to say, alright, we got to get the troops ready. So it will create more clones of itself. It's going to start dividing, create more helper T cells. Some of them will stimulate the production of the killer T cells, which are going to come in and attack. Some of the helper T cells will tell the B cells to start making antibodies. So now we have these antibodies which are going to come in and attack and kill the pathogens. And then we have some T cells which will stick around as memory cells if the pathogen comes back in the future. So that's what we're covering today, which was the humoral response and the cell-mediated response. Now remember, those are both types of specific immunity. The specific immune response. The general immune response will happen for any cell, for any invading bacteria or pathogens, such as inflammation or causing a fever, those sort of things. This is the specific immune response for specific types of pathogens. Alright, there we go. Thanks.